So there's a few things here, you know, that this has come out of the review that they did on remote learning, that it is important to teach those strategies that pupils need to work independently. And they are things that we can kind of distill and we can teach explicitly. And this is going to be especially important for those pupils that are particularly disadvantaged. I mean, you know, in a normal situation, and you will know if you have been teaching remotely at the moment, there are kids that will be getting on with this and flying at the moment. You know, there are some kids that are sat at home, they have the facilities, they have the time, the space, the support, or the self-regulation skills that are already well developed, and they will be flying with remote learning, and that is fantastic. And you know, we also need to support them, but there will be some that are finding it much more difficult, and they are the ones that we really need to think about in this context. And I say, I've taken some of these slides from Norwich Research School, who did a webinar on metacognition and home learning. It's on YouTube, so Google it if you want to look for it. I found it really, really helpful. And like I say, I've nicked some of the slides directly from them. But this was about basically a planning framework that the EEF produced in response to the situation we're in at the moment. And the planning framework was really planned to answer the question, you know, how can we adjust our practice to help students learn remotely? That's the kind of question, that's the puzzle that they were trying to solve, the issue they were trying to solve. Now, this planning framework is available online. If you go to the EEF website or just Google EEF COVID-19 resources, there are some resources that have been specifically put together to support schools at the moment. And one of those resources is this planning framework. And the idea of this is it's tried to take the recommendations from the metacognition guidance report and how lessons and learning sequences should be planned to help to teach and to develop and support the metacognitive strategies in our pupils. How, you know, that guidance report was written for a usual normal face-to-face classroom situation, and how can we try to translate that to the situation we have at the moment. So if you look online, there's this one here, which is basically explains what the framework is. And actually what I think it's worth looking at here is, so I was part of the team that put this together, and we were very explicit about the fact that we wanted offline as well as online examples. For the reasons that Roger said, you know, there will be kids that are quite able to access this stuff, and there will be others that aren't. So, you know, really wanted to think about the offline as well as online. And so there's this one that kind of tells you how it works. There's a blank version if you want to put it together, and there's some worked examples there as well that we'll kind of look at in a minute. What I would say about this is if you are thinking about metacognition and this kind of learning sequence in normal times, this is never something that was ever expected to take place in one single lesson. And I think that's the big mistake people make sometimes when they look at the metacognition guidance report. It talks about activating learning and practicing and reviewing and all these things that are really, really important. Even the, you know, the monitoring and evaluation, planning, monitoring, evaluation cycle, the more simple one. There are, the big mistake I think that people make is to think they have to do that within their 50-minute lesson or their hour lesson, because you can't. And you know, learning doesn't happen like that. Learning doesn't neatly fall into a 1-hour slot. But if, for example, I'm thinking, okay, so at the moment, over the next few weeks, I'm going to be teaching about the periodic table, and I want to make sure, first of all, my pupils remember what the periodic table is and what it represents and how it's put together and why it's put together in the way it is. And really what I want to get to by the end of, you know, this sequence of learning is I want them to be able to link that to the structure of the atom, and I want them to be able to make certain predictions from it. That's probably a couple of weeks learning. That's probably 3, 4, maybe 5 lessons, especially if I really spend a lot of time kind of practicing things and making sure they know it. Now, within that sequence of learning, I want to remind them what they know about the periodic table. I want to do various things where they practice different skills, and I want to come back and review it at the end. And, you know, there'll be so much involved in that. Over that course of time, I will be following that metacognitive sequence, but it won't be within a 1-hour slot.